Your wedding begins here. You've found your person. Now find your perfect place. Welcome to Marin County, where your love story meets its perfect setting. Exchange vows beneath ancient redwoods on a sun-kissed beach or overlooking the sparkling San Francisco Bay. Whether you're planning an intimate elopement or a grand affair, Marin offers the space and the spirit to make your wedding uniquely yours. Discover where forever begins at visitmarin.org and explore the weddings page for details.
Welcome to the Universal Podcast Network. One voice, everywhere.
Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She's a mindful art teacher, coach, passionate about sharing creative and calming practice of self-care, none other than Miss Cynthia Hauk. Welcome, Miss Cynthia, on Book 101 Review. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I missed?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Daniel. So I largely help people who want to tap more into their creativity or also want to find more creative ways to manage stress and have better self-care. I do that through online classes, and I also have online mindful art teacher trainings. So I train art therapists, coaches, meditation teachers, etc.
Well, what a nice introduction indeed, Miss Cynthia. Here on Book 101 Review, we salute you, we celebrate you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to us, as well as to the world. Thank you. And today, let's talk about something good. All about all the hats that we mentioned, and all about self-care. You define mindful art as a distinct from art therapy. For someone who's never picked up on a paintbrush or think they are not creative, how do you describe what mindful art is and what is not in a way that makes them feel welcome rather than intimidated?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So what I love about these practices is that it really does meet you exactly where you are. So whether you've been a creative for many years or you feel like you can't draw a stick figure, which is what I hear from students a lot, these practices can be adapted to make it easy for you to start creating without the pressure. So a big part about mindful art practices is that you might be exploring really simple drawing or doodling, painting, collage. There's different practices that I teach, but the core foundation of all of them is that we're just simply noticing the present moment and trying to give ourselves permission to create without judgment. We might be noticing the sounds or feeling the brush in our hand. So it's a different way of creating than when I was taught years ago in art school, where I was creating for a grade or I was creating to defend my work in a dissertation. It's really the focus instead is not necessarily about what we create. It's more about how we feel as we're creating, which is why it's really beautiful as a form of self-care. Because I don't know about you, Daniel, but I can be on my phone more than I would like and be on screens more than I would like. And so it gives us something we can actually touch with our hands. We get off screens, and it can just naturally help us to feel less stressed and more calm.
Well said, Miss Cynthia. You've been facilitating mindful art since 2007 and have reached students in over 50 countries. What have you learned about what humans universally seek from creative practice, regardless of culture, language, or background?
Yeah, I think I love that you're asking that question because I do feel like creativity can be so universal. It's part of our human experience. So some things I've really noticed with myself and people I've worked with, taught other teachers, peers, is that we often have the desire to create. That's a very human need and feeling that we want to create. And then we also at the same time have this resistance to creating where we sometimes can be harsh on ourselves or feel like we're not ready yet or what we're going to create isn't good enough. So I refer to that typically as the inner critic. And so that is a very common experience. And I like to name it because instead of trying to eradicate or get rid of our inner critic, we can just notice that that's part of the creative process, actually. As we do something new and outside of our comfort zone, it's normal that that part of us would come up to protect us. And instead, we have little kind of tricks in the tool belt with Mindful Art of how we can just continue to move forward, even with that inner critical part being present. And so I would say those are two really key things that every single person I've ever spoken with that's explored creativity has experienced.
Hear and feel what live music can do at the San Francisco Symphony. Experience a spectrum of orchestral favorites, appearances by world-renowned guest stars, hit film scores performed live to screen, dazzling multimedia projections, and much more. Join us for the San Francisco Symphony's exciting new season, kicking off this September at Davies Symphony Hall. Tickets at sfsymphony.org.
Miss Cynthia, busy people are core audience for your work. What is it about mindful art that makes it particularly suited to someone whose life feels so full rather than being one more thing on their to-do list?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So we are also split with our time. And I think, like probably many people listening, I personally want to do all the things. I want to do so many things, and I need like 5 of me to do it. What makes mindful art different and supportive is that it is a way that we can naturally give ourselves a pause in our day and give us a little more breathing room. We're so inundated right now with ads and screens and to-do lists and a million other things outside of ourselves asking for our attention, that mindful art allows us to have just a little mini pause, even if it's just 5 minutes, to turn inward instead of allowing all of those external voices and kind of chatter to come in. So the mindful art practices that I teach specifically are not only about the sensory experience, but also it's like a visual journal. So noticing how you're feeling, what are your thoughts, what emotions are coming up. And so it can hold back a mirror reflection to ourselves. And it's a really nice pause and self-care moment in your day.
Well said, well said. Miss Cynthia, you often share simple activities for stress relief. Can you walk us through the one mindful art practice that someone could not do right now in this moment with whatever materials they have within arm's reach?
Yeah, so some of my really quick favorite go-to practices, if you literally just have a pen and paper or a pencil and paper, and 2 minutes or 5 minutes, I like to teach practices I refer to as breath doodles, and they're exactly as they sound. You're really just combining simple doodles and marks. They can be squiggles, shapes, circles, squares. You could draw any sort of marks, and we're syncing them up with our breath. So it's almost like tracing your breath on the page. And I have about 15 or 20 different specific mark making patterns that I teach to sync up with the breath, but you don't even need to know those. You could always explore them later if you'd like. But what I would encourage is, if you have a sticky pad and a pen or a piece of paper, is just to give yourself permission to make a mark as you inhale and then make a different mark as you exhale, and just notice how those marks can start repeating on the page, and noticing your breath without feeling like you need to change your breath. I think that's kind of the key part, is that we're not trying to force our breath in a particular way. I hear from a lot of people that they find meditation challenging. And what I love about mindful art practices is it's another way that you can start meditating or doing a breath meditation, but doing it through really simple doodles instead. And it can just feel a lot more accessible and easy. And breath doodles are something that the teachers I train, they share them with their kids that are, 5, 6 years old. So age doesn't really make a difference with those practices.
Interesting. Miss Cynthia, there's a difference between making art to produce something and making art as a practice of a presence. How do you help people shift from product oriented thinking to process oriented being, and why does that shift matter?
Yeah, I would say that's a core part of mindful art practices and really why I personally started doing this work. So I initially was in art school when I was younger. I did my MFA in the arts and I learned a lot in that process, but actually I learned to really be self-critical and to not enjoy the process. And then I had to unlearn that after I finished my schooling. And a large part of that was through these really simple practices with mindful art. And I always say it's not that you won't necessarily love what you end up creating, or if you're trained to create aesthetic art, that you won't enjoy what it looks like or hang it on the wall. But the intention, the focus is not that we're creating something to get a grade or to sell it or to get approval from someone else. We're really doing it more so as a curiosity of just noticing, how am I feeling in this moment as I'm creating? And how can I be kinder to myself as I am creating? How can you give yourself permission to make marks that might be outside of your comfort zone, and to try and experiment and have fun or notice how each moment unfolds? So it really is such a kind foundation of mindfulness, but with the art practice. So the practice piece is really important of trusting the process.
Trusting the process indeed. Miss Cynthia, what's happening psychologically and physiologically when someone engaged in mindful art? Why does the combination of mindfulness and creativity work as stress in a way that either one alone might not?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Your wedding begins here. You've found your person. Now find your perfect place. Welcome to Marin County, where your love story meets its perfect setting. Exchange vows beneath ancient redwoods on a sun-kissed beach or overlooking the sparkling San Francisco Bay. Whether you're planning an intimate elopement or a grand affair, Marin offers the space and the spirit to make your wedding uniquely yours. Discover where forever begins at visitmarin.org and explore the weddings page for details.
Question. So we know that in order to access our creativity more fully, we need our nervous systems to be in more of a state of balance. So if you've heard of, like, if you're in a fight, flight, or freeze response, or if you're in more of a rest and digest place, when we're stressed out, I think it's Dr. Dan Siegel, he talks about how if we get triggered or stressed out, you can flip your lid. And he uses his hand as like a brain diagram where the front part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, goes offline. And when that happens, we struggle with making decisions. We struggle with accessing our creativity. And so what I've noticed when I do this practice is by focusing on the sensory experience, perhaps noticing my breath or noticing the sounds around me, and having a moment where I can come back into a place of balance where I can feel more calm and less stressed, then I feel like I can access more creative choices and I can make more creative decisions. And they've shown that with science, with mindfulness and how the nervous system works. And so there's lots of ways we can do that to support our nervous system. This is one of my favorite ways, is combining the mindfulness and art together. And I think the biggest part for me too is that it just removes pressure. We have so much pressure in our lives elsewhere that it's really, I find it so supportive to come to a space where I know I can create on my own and just not have that pressure. And so that also helps to be more creative.
Indeed, to be more creative, you speak about embracing the inner critic rather than silencing or defeating it. That's a subtle but profound reframe. What does embracing the inner critic actually look like in a practice, and how does that relationship change over time?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I notice I've been an artist for many, many years, like probably 30 years plus. And I've been doing mindful art for probably half of that time. And I still notice as I'm creating that my inner critic will come in. I think that can be a myth that if you do practice long enough, that maybe you don't have inner critical thoughts anymore. And I can say that is not true. And so when those inner critical thoughts come in, instead of, I feel like in the past, what I would often do is I would try to ignore my inner critic, or I would try to silence or push away my inner critic. And that is still another part of me that's really, I believe, just trying to keep me safe. And so instead now what I've done for many years with mindful art is I make space for my inner critic. And sometimes that might simply look like resting a hand on my heart and acknowledging, saying like, thank you, I got this, we can still create. Or I think of having a visual metaphor of if there are any concerns that I can like write them down and set them off to the side of where I'm creating with the art journal, that I could always come back and listen to those concerns later if I'd like to. But right now I'm focusing simply on the sounds, on my breath, on choosing different colors. I like to call them anchor points. So similar to a breath meditation, you might focus on the breath. With mindful art, we have different anchors that are connected to our art materials. So I simply honor that my inner critic has shown up. I offer compassion and permission, and then I continuously return back to the intentions of the practice and those different art anchors.
Well said, well said, Cynthia. Imposter syndrome shows up for both beginners and experienced artists. What is the moment in your career where imposter syndrome visited you, and what did you learn from that encounter that you now teach to others?
Oh my gosh. The imposter syndrome comes up for me cyclically. So there have been moments in my art career and teaching career where it's like every time I come to something that is maybe much bigger than what I've done before in the past, there can be a mix of, I'm sure many people can relate to this, you might feel excited, but then also partially terrified, and also like, ooh, who am I to be the one doing this? And that is something that has come up various different times throughout my career. And what I've learned the most about that is, I think very similar to what we were talking about with the inner critic, is to just normalize the experience. I think that there's deep value in making sure that you are as prepared as possible without stopping you from moving forward. So what I mean by that is I train therapists and coaches and teachers and creatives how to teach mindful art activities, so they're aware of how to create a workshop, how to facilitate in a trauma-informed way. So there's when we come up against something and we notice that imposter syndrome, I think a key question is that coming up because I'm really not qualified? Do I need training and skills or certification or experience? Or is that coming up because I've already done all of that work and it's just arriving here because it's something new outside of my comfort zone? And maybe in those instances, you need more accountability or coaching and to take just the one next small step. And so that's something that when those moments have happened and it's arisen for me, that I really try to look at it in a discerning way and then make decisions that I can just continue to take one step forward. I think when we get stuck, it's because we completely stop momentum. So we don't have to do all the things, but to still keep taking some small steps forward. And then the last thing I'll say on this imposter syndrome is the more, even though it still arises, the more that we take action, I think that action can help to calm those thoughts around imposter syndrome. And when we get feedback, so I'm constantly asking students for feedback. I'm constantly training teachers to ask for feedback, just so you're not living in a silo.
Well, that is interesting. Cynthia, self-sabotage can be one of the most painful parts of creative life. What are the most common patterns you see, and what is the first step someone can take when they recognize they're standing in their own way?
Yeah, so I did some deeper investigative work around self-sabotage years ago because I kept noticing it coming up for me and for students I was working with. And so I actually created 8 categories of what I feel like often are the most common ways we block ourselves creatively that shows up as self-sabotage. I won't go into all of them, but I'll mention kind of my top ones and the top ones I see from others. And I have it in a free workbook that's called Mindful Art for Self-Care on my website too, that you could always download and see that list. And there's anecdotes for each of them. But some of the biggest self-sabotaging methods that I find show up for creatives, but maybe for others as well, is feeling like you're not good enough. I see procrastination tends to be an overarching one that some of the other self-sabotaging ones fit into. But feeling not good enough, feeling like you don't have enough time, feeling overwhelmed, that's a really big one for creatives where you actually have too many ideas. It's not that you don't have creative ideas, it's that you don't know how to direct all of those ideas or how to focus on just the next step. So those are kind of three main ones. And then also this feeling somehow that our creativity is not worth the time or energy or dedication, and that imposter syndrome that you mentioned, especially as people are starting to teach or share in the world, that can come up. So with all of those, I think the key part that I usually recommend first is just to get it out of your head and onto the page. Notice what are some of those self-sabotaging actions or self-limiting beliefs, and actually see it in a list outside of you. It's called externalization. When we can see something outside of us, it gives just a little bit of breathing space so we can notice and be with it. And then I usually will write down as many ideas as possible, small, like 2-minute actions that I could do to start moving forward past one of those self-sabotaging blocks. And then maybe choose one for the week that you'll do, or choose 3. And then, of course, having support is really helpful. But those are some of the ways I move through self-sabotage, because it'll come up again and again.
Miss Cynthia, perfectionism often masquerades as a high standard. How do you help someone distinguish between healthy creative rigor and the kind of perfectionism that keeps them stuck, silent, or never finishing?
Yeah, so I most relate this to curiosity. If we can approach, because I think having discernment and going back and looking at what you created and seeing if you want to make any changes, that's healthy to do that. What I find not healthy is if we start then berating ourselves or beating ourselves up over it, or as you're saying, having it come in so strongly that then it just stops us from creating again or from moving forward. So that's why I really love this combination of mindfulness with art, because we're naturally inviting that lens of how we're looking at it from a place of curiosity instead of criticism. And I mean, I just think of like relationships. Anytime something's coming up, if you're having a conversation, if that conversation is rooted in curiosity and care and compassion, that is going to be much more well received than if it's coming from a place of criticism. And so just noticing how we're talking to ourselves. And then the other thing I'll say around that is that to give yourself the space to create. And then if you are also going to go back and have some curiosity around what you might try differently next time, or what you want to learn or deepen into, as best as possible, keep those two things separate. So have a time just for creativity, and then have a time where you might be doing more curiosity, questioning around what might be next for your creative practice or for your self-care practice.
Well, Ms. Cynthia, before we continue our discussion, can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
Yeah, so my students have heard me talk about this again and again, and on my YouTube channel too. I talk all the time about how I love Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way. I'm sure many people have heard of it, so it's not new. What I will say, though, is that I carried that book with me for about 15 years through multiple states and multiple moves before I finally was able to read through all of it and go through like the 12 weeks through the creative process. And once I did, it was life-changing for me. I've since read the book multiple times. I used to facilitate Artist's Way groups where we would come together. I have read some of Julia Cameron's other books, like The Vein of Gold is a recent one I read of hers, which is really lovely. And it's just a really beautiful companion for your creative practice, and to give you encouragement along the path to continue to stay curious about your creativity. So it's one of my absolute favorites.
Thank you for sharing that recommended book, Miss Cynthia. And to wrap up our discussion for today, if you could place a mindful art prompt into the hands of every person on earth, knowing it will be meet them exactly where they are, what would that prompt be?
Lately, I've been teaching a practice that I call mood minis. And the invitation would be to choose a color that you feel particularly drawn to in this moment. You don't need to know why, there's no rhyme or reason, but choosing a color and then noticing after you have that color on the page, how you feel. If you were to name that color had an emotion tied to it, what might that emotion be? Knowing that those mood minis that you create, you could do the same mood mini every day for the rest of your life and it would be different. And the colors and the meaning you give them can also change over time. So that is a really simple practice that I have been exploring lately that I really love to share.
Well said, Cynthia. So can you please invite our listeners to support your projects, your business, or anything you want to promote on Book 101 Review?
Yeah, I would say for anybody who's curious about trying some really simple mindful art practices, I have an art as meditation workshop. It's 60 minutes long. It includes 3 different practices as well as more background around the benefits of this work. And so if you want to try that, it's totally free. The link is on my website. I'll share it here with Daniel as well that he can share in the show notes.
Indeed. And I have one more question before I will let you go, Ms. Cynthia. At its core, what the mindful art really about for you beyond stress relief, beyond creativity, beyond the language you use to describe it is used to students? What is the deepest thing it has given you personally?
I love that question. For me, I usually refer to mindful art as a container. It is a place that I feel deeply held within, that I can turn to as a safe refuge, that I can learn more about myself, that I can create and express myself freely. And I think the biggest gift is that it's helped me to become more of the person that I want to be over time. And it's been a companion for me.
A companion indeed. So, Miss Cynthia, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Daniel.
You are most welcome and looking forward for more episodes that we will do. And Marticon people, see you soon.
Thank you for joining us on the Universal Podcast Network. One voice, everywhere.
Your wedding begins here. You've found your person. Now find your perfect place. Welcome to Marin County, where your love story meets its perfect setting. Exchange vows beneath ancient redwoods on a sun-kissed beach or overlooking the sparkling San Francisco Bay. Whether you're planning an intimate elopement or a grand affair, Marin offers the space and the spirit to make your wedding uniquely yours. Discover where forever begins at visitmarin.org and explore the weddings page for details.